The following story is about a real homicide investigation with graphic content. Viewer discretion is advised. So I get this call from an NYPD homicide detective, and he starts to tell me this crazy story about a homicide that he's been investigating in New York City for the last 10 years. So the million-dollar question is, what does that have to do with me? Welcome back. Today we're talking about a brand new case that's actually a cold case. Well, people are confused a lot of times about what exactly a cold case is. When a homicide detective shows up on scene, starts their investigation, they're looking for clues, leads, evidence. Unfortunately, evidence runs out, leads dry up, they're not able to solve the case. Meanwhile, they're catching other cases. So this case then becomes in the status of what's called cold case, meaning it's not closed, it's still there, and eventually that detective, or perhaps a cold case detective, will come back and pick that case up, re-interview witnesses, re-examine evidence, see if there's any technology available in the future that may be able to help test some things to get this case closed. Now, regular homicide cases are difficult in and of themselves. Picking up a cold case that's years old is even more difficult. Evidence has been destroyed, perhaps degraded. Witnesses have moved on. Some of the witnesses' recollections have changed. Some of them have died. So it is extremely difficult. And the clearance rate on cold cases is not great. Throughout my career, I've had the pleasure and the opportunity to work on several cold cases. This particular case we're going to talk to today fell in my lap from the sky in the most unusual way. So it's March 17th, 2010. I'm sitting in the homicide office and my phone rings. I answer the phone. I said, "Detective Velazquez, what can I do for you?" And on the other end of the line, with a very heavy New York accent, he tells me his name is Detective Eddie Wilkowski and that he's a homicide detective with NYPD. So typically when you get a call from a detective from out of state, it's simple. They want you to go knock on a door, talk to a witness for them real quick, record it, send it to them, and do a quick report. In my career up until that point, I've done that countless number of times. That's what my expectation was at that point. I had no idea what ride I was in for. And he goes on to say, "I've been trying to reach somebody in your homicide unit for months, and I've been getting the runaround, so please do not hang up on me." And I said, "My man, what do you got? What do you need? What can I do for you?" He goes, "Thank you so much." And he starts to tell me this crazy story about a homicide that he's been investigating in New York City for the last 10 years. Detective Wilkowski goes on to tell me that it was September 18, 2000. He responds to a house fire in Queens, New York, but it wasn't just a fire. Inside of that house, they found the deceased body of 23-year-old Tennille Kitt. My mind is going crazy. As a homicide detective, I'm already thinking it's nefarious. I'm already thinking there's foul play. Detective Wilkowski goes on to tell me that when they extinguished the fire, they found the victim and discovered that she was 6 months pregnant. This is not just the murder of this 23-year-old woman. This is also the murder of her unborn baby. This is a double homicide. Eddie Wilkowski further says that he actually knew this victim. Through his years of experience working that particular precinct in that neighborhood, Detective Wilkowski had dealt with this victim, has seen this victim grow up essentially. And now at 23 years old, years later, he's standing over her dead body, scratching his head, wondering who could have done this to this poor girl. And in my career, I've had several cases where I've shown up on the scene and I look down at my victim and I recognize them. Someone I had dealt with before, someone who I either helped in the past as a uniformed police officer or as a detective had dealings with either that victim or someone in their family. I've had victims where I saw them as young boys, 6 or 7, and then 10 years later at 16, I'm standing over their body as a homicide victim, and it's not easy. It's not easy to disconnect that personal feeling you have as a detective because you're also a human being. So Detective Wilkowski, although he wouldn't admit that this was personal, I knew it was personal. Detective Wilkowski was on a mission to solve this case. But the most important thing he discovered that he knew right away was a crazy clue. The victim's face was covered. And the fact that her face is covered, that usually means the killer is someone close to the victim. So of course I want to know more details about this case. Detective Wilkowski tells me that during the autopsy they discovered that this victim's cause of death was actually manual strangulation. I mean, that's putting your hands around someone's neck and choking them until the life leaves their body. And it makes sense to me at that point why her face is covered. I've had many cases like that up until this point in my career. And typically what that means is the killer is close to the victim. There was some type of altercation, there's emotions, there's rage involved, and then after the act is done, they can't look at their face, so they cover it up. So right now, this is not a stranger on stranger crime. Detective Wilkowski went on to say, a rape kit was performed, they found no DNA, and there were really no signs of sexual assault. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. And remember, this house was on fire. They found that the killer actually set the fire in 4 different locations within the house. They also found a bottle of acetone within the house used as the accelerant to set the fire. This killer went to great lengths to destroy evidence. And typically when someone does that, that means they know their DNA, their fingerprints, their hair, perhaps clothing, evidence connecting them to the murder is all over the apartment. So that right there really made me feel that whoever killed this victim was really close to this victim. Every detective has that one case that got away from you. While you're still working, you want to solve that case before you retire. And I admired Detective Wilkowski. I could hear it in his voice. I could hear his passion. I could hear his drive. I could hear his determination that whatever it took, he was going to solve this case. It reminded me of a case I had that I couldn't solve, that I was still carrying that burden on my shoulders for many, many years. And at the point where I'm speaking to Detective Wilkowski, it motivated me, it gave me passion to actually think about the case that I still haven't solved, to reach back out to that family and let them know I hadn't forgotten about you. Detective Wilkowski was a grizzled, experienced homicide detective. He sparked something in me in that conversation that I hadn't felt in a long time. It's almost as if the universe aligned and connected me with Detective Wilkowski. Although I didn't know where we would end up, I knew that this journey with Detective Wilkowski was going to be beneficial for both of us. So right now, I'm waiting on the next bit. I want to hear from Eddie who he thinks this could be. The $1 million question I had was, have you developed a suspect? Detective Wilkowski goes on to say he did. In fact, the name is Lee Hines. Unfamiliar to me, and of course I want to know from this detective, what is the connection with Lee Hines to this particular victim that 10 years later he's still asking questions? So Detective Wilkowski says that this guy Lee Hines actually was at the crime scene when the fire was going on behind the police tape. They started to look at people in the crowd, and the police actually talked to him. And when they did, he told the uniformed officers that he actually knew the victim inside of the place that was burning and that he was friends with her boyfriend. Now, how would he know that? Many times, suspects return to the scene of the crime for many reasons. Gratification, maybe because he wanted to make sure the house completely burned up. For whatever reason, this particular suspect, Lee Hines, returns to the scene. And if you've ever seen any TV cop dramas or TV shows where you see the crime scene technicians taking photographs of the crowd, that's the reason why. You never know what you're going to capture in those photos. And in this particular case, Lee Hines returned to the scene. If he indeed is the killer, this guy is a sociopath. So the police question him and ask him, why are you here? It's 4 o'clock in the morning when this fire is raging and the fire department is trying to put it out, and there's Lee Hines standing there watching them work. So they ask him, why are you here? He says, I heard the sirens and I was at my girlfriend's house down the block. So I decided to get out of bed and come and see what was going on. So Detective Wilkowski, being the great detective that he is, didn't believe that story. He wanted to verify. He wanted to corroborate what Lee Hines was saying. So he actually goes and speaks to Lee Hines' girlfriend, who then confirms that Lee Hines was actually at her place, was sleeping with her, and when the sirens went off, they both woke up and Lee Hines left. Detective Wilkowski went on to tell me that his spidey senses were tingling when he's talking to Lee Hines' girlfriend. He didn't quite believe her. He felt that Lee Hines had some sort of control over her. So right now, he's really looking at Lee Hines sideways. He's not feeling this alibi is legit, and he's got a potential suspect in his sight. Literally, the night this crime occurs, at the crime scene, watching the fire department put out the fire. So now with all this information, Lee Hines is on the top of Eddie Wilkowski's suspect list. So what does he do? He starts digging into the life of Lee Hines, and he soon finds out through interviewing this victim's friends that Lee Hines was a problem for this victim. There was a connection. Somehow they ran into each other in the neighborhood, and Lee Hines became infatuated with this victim, was trying to basically date her, and that she didn't want anything to do with him. He would show up unannounced. He would wait for her to come out of her house and follow her and try to talk to her, all to the point where this victim started to avoid Lee Hines at all costs, telling her friends there's something wrong with him. So now Detective Wilkowski has directly connected Lee Hines to this victim who was murdered in her own home in the house set ablaze to destroy evidence. The same location that Lee Hines shows up to while the fire is still raging. So Detective Wilkowski is on the right path days after this homicide occurs. And I was at the edge of my seat. I was on pins and needles waiting to hear what he's gonna tell me next. Over the months and years that followed after this victim was killed, Detective Wilkowski worked diligently trying to solve this case and felt strongly that Lee Hines was actually the person who killed this victim. However, what he found was brick walls. People he spoke to were afraid of Lee Hines. They wouldn't speak to him. He had a reputation in the neighborhood of being the heavy, someone who would lay the law down on people, women in particular. So anytime he would find a new girlfriend of Lee Hines and try to speak to her, just in case there was a third-party confession where Lee Hines admitted to it, he realized every woman he spoke to was deathly afraid of Lee Hines. And if Detective Wilkowski was correct that Lee Hines actually is the killer, it's no mystery why all these other women were afraid of Lee Hines. So this case eventually went cold, but Detective Wilkowski never forgot about it. And every so often would still interview people, still try to find evidence, still try to talk to people to see if he can bring closure to this case. And now 10 years later, he's on the phone with me. So up until this point, Detective Wilkowski has been telling me this crazy tale. I'm at the edge of my seat. I want to fly to New York and help this guy solve his case. I'm hooked. I'm like someone fishing in a pond. The hook is in my mouth. I'm not going nowhere. I want to be brought up to the surface and help this guy. But the million-dollar question is, what does this have to do with the Atlanta Police Department? Detective Wilkowski goes on to tell me that during his investigation, he discovered that Lee Hines was connected to an open homicide of a woman in the city of Atlanta. And that's the reason he's calling me. So his goal was to take Lee Hines off the streets before he killed someone else. And if that meant solving a case in another jurisdiction, that's all he wanted. So his motivation was, let's see if this is really a case that you can solve, and let's get this guy off the streets. So Detective Wilkowski tells me that he was able to find some witnesses in New York that were willing to talk, but not about the Tennille Kitt murder, but instead said Lee Hines murdered a woman in Atlanta in 2003, and through Detective Wilkowski's investigation, he learned that that victim's name was LaCharity Gaines. So this is 2010. At this point, I'm assigned specifically to the cold case unit. I would have thought that that name would have just jumped out at me. We were tasked with going back and looking at all of the open cases, starting with females, to see if we can test forensically any DNA, especially sexual assaults. So I was very familiar with all of the cold case open homicides dealing with women, and that name would have jumped out at me. Had that been an open case, I would have known that name as soon as he mentioned it. And the fact that I didn't, I wasn't very hopeful I was gonna find an open case with the name LaCharity Gaines. And I had to think that these women that he's been talking to in New York associated with Lee Hines, they're probably just trying to pacify Detective Wilkowski to get him off their back. So I wasn't hopeful that this information that he was receiving from these women was actually factual or even useful. But nevertheless, I knew the passion that this detective had. I knew the determination that he had to try and get this crazy person off the streets. So I had to do my due diligence. I promised him I would check into the name to see if we had anything dealing with the name LaCharity Gaines. So I tell Detective Wilkowski, let me research the name. I'll get back to you and call you later. As soon as I hang up from Detective Wilkowski, I call our crime analyst and I ask her to search the database for the name LaCharity Gaines and give me everything you have on it. Even if it's a traffic citation to a report of a missing bicycle, whatever comes up under that name, send it to me. In my mind, I'm like, does this name even really exist? Does this person exist within the city limits of Atlanta? Is there any interaction with the Atlanta Police Department, much less an open homicide case? And I figured if we do a query on the name for every single document ever generated by the Atlanta Police Department with that name, that I can exhaust that list and get back to Detective Wilkowski and unfortunately tell him that the information he gave me was incorrect. And about 10 minutes later, my phone rang at my desk and my crime analyst says, I got what you need, come and see me. I walk over to her desk and she hands me a homicide file, and I couldn't believe it. On the cover of that file was the name LaCharity Gaines. I was floored. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is not an open homicide. This is closed. No wonder why I was not familiar with the name. I couldn't believe it. I had to dive into this file to find out exactly what in the hell was going on. So as I opened the homicide file of LaCharity Gaines, one thing that jumped out at me right away, LaCharity Gaines was a 23-year-old single mother, just like Tennille Kitt in New York City. So what I quickly learned, it's February 26, 2003, LaCharity's mom calls the Atlanta Police Department to file a missing persons report for her daughter LaCharity, who had not been seen in some time. In reading the file, LaCharity's mom tells the police back in 2003 that her daughter had met a guy from New York City named Nitty, and that after dating a while, he moved in with her, and as sometimes relationships sour, theirs did. Things weren't going great. And then all of a sudden, one morning, LaCharity's daughter wakes up and can't find her mom anywhere and calls her grandmother, LaCharity's mom, to tell her, my mom is missing. And therefore, LaCharity's mother then calls the police department to file a missing persons report. Now, just because someone is reported missing, it doesn't always mean that there's foul play involved. People sometimes go missing on purpose. They have the right to do that. They disconnect and they just leave. But according to the file, when they interviewed LaCharity's mom, she told the police that LaCharity was not that person. She would never just pack up and leave without telling anybody. Her mother knew something wasn't right. Her daughter should not be missing, especially waking up in the morning for her daughter to find her mom gone. That would never happen. So her mom was convinced that something bad happened to her daughter. Interestingly enough, not only was LaCharity missing, so was this guy named Nitty. LaCharity's mom told the police she didn't know Nitty's real name, it was a nickname. When she met him once or twice with her daughter LaCharity, that's how he introduced himself. And her daughter never really had a conversation about what his real name was. She trusted that her daughter was making the right decision. She trusted her daughter that whoever this Nitty person was, that she wouldn't allow this person to be around her children if she didn't trust him. So I'm reading the file, and not only do I see that LaCharity's missing, Nitty is missing, but more importantly, LaCharity's purse is missing. $2,000 in cash from a recent tax refund check is missing. Her vehicle is missing. So now I'm starting to see more of a picture of something foul. Something doesn't smell right. As I dig deeper into the file, I learned that LaCharity's vehicle was actually found on the same day she was reported missing at a bus station in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, that could mean a million things. If LaCharity truly wants to be missing and drove there and got on a bus, if that's the case, the police had work to do just to locate her and make sure she's okay. But right now, with the purse, the money, and leaving her daughter abandoned overnight, it doesn't make sense. So according to the file, police investigators actually went and searched LaCharity's apartment to look for her, and they didn't see anything out of place. They left, and LaCharity's daughter ended up going to stay with her grandmother. In the meantime, some days had gone by, and the family hadn't gotten any updates on the location of LaCharity Gaines. So LaCharity's mom asked her brother, LaCharity's uncle, to come to Atlanta from out of town and help look for her daughter. 5 days after LaCharity Gaines is reported missing by her mom, her uncle arrives at her apartment. As soon as he walks into the apartment, there is a foul odor in the air. As he starts to look around in the apartment in every room, the uncle enters the kitchen, he sees a pantry, opens the door, and to his shock and horror, sees what he believes to be a body wrapped up in a carpet, and immediately backs out and calls the Atlanta Police Department. As police arrive, they go to the kitchen and they open the pantry and see exactly what the uncle saw. They remove the rolled up carpet, unravel it, and discover the body of a black female. They quickly confirm that this in fact was LaCharity Gaines, and she had been killed from one stab wound to the back with a knife. I've started to think back to the Tennille Kitt murder in New York, where the killer covered her face. In this case in Atlanta, she's concealed as well. She's wrapped in a carpet and hidden. So right now, there's some similarities between these two cases. Both of these victims are 23 years old. One was killed by strangulation, and now I discovered LaCharity Gaines in Atlanta was killed with a knife to the back. That's horrific. That almost spells that this victim was running away from the killer, and she took one knife wound to the back that killed her. This case is crazy. Detectives kept processing the scene after finding her body and discovered that there was obvious signs of a struggle within the apartment. They found pieces of broken glass and mirror shoved underneath the victim's bed. There was an area on the carpet that had blood on it that a cloth was thrown over it to conceal that blood. So whoever killed this victim went through great lengths to cover evidence, to put space and time between the victim, the crime scene, and themselves. And I had to think back. This victim's car was found at a bus station in Charlotte, North Carolina, the same day that the victim was reported missing. Whoever killed this victim left in a hurry. Her purse is missing, her money's missing, her car is missing. So Atlanta detectives kept digging. Although the mother of this victim didn't know Nitty's real name, detectives did their due diligence and were able to track this nickname Nitty all the way back to New York City, and soon discovered that Nitty in fact was Lee Hines, the same suspect Detective Wilkowski called me about, the same suspect who he believes killed his victim, Tennille Kitt. Now knowing that Nitty is Lee Hines and that Detective Wilkowski has been on the right track all along, the glaring question though is, this is a closed homicide. Closed homicide means an arrest has been made. And as I start to thumb through the file and I start to look at exactly what the conclusion was, detectives in 2003, after discovering Nitty's name to be Lee Hines, after discovering that Lee Hines, Nitty, had a relationship with the victim, LaCharity Gaines, after learning that he also went missing, the Atlanta Police Department issued an arrest warrant for Lee Nitty Hines, whereby he's arrested in July 2003 in South Carolina and extradited back to the city of Atlanta. It was clear to me that the evidence to arrest Lee Hines in 2003 for the murder of LaCharity Gaines was weak. They arrested him on having a relationship with this victim, and that he went missing after her death. And that's it. The way this works in the Fulton County, City of Atlanta judicial system in 2003, an arrest is made on an arrest warrant. It goes through municipal court, what's called a probable cause hearing. And in this case, I learned that after Lee Nitty Hines got arrested, his case went through municipal court for a probable cause hearing, whereby the case facts are presented to a judge, and the judge does not find enough probable cause to bind this case over to the state. And based on weak evidence, the judge at that hearing dismissed the case. Now, what that means is on the books, this case was cleared by arrest. If that judge found enough evidence to do so, then the Fulton County District Attorney's Office would pick the case up and present the case for indictment to a grand jury for a formal charge. But in this particular case, since this municipal lower court judge decided there was not enough evidence, they granted Lee Hines a bond and he was free to walk out, and told the Atlanta Police Department, you still got work to do. And that's where the case died. Nothing happened after that day. It's no wonder at that point in my career working cold cases that the name LaCharity Gaines did not transfer over to the cold case homicide list. It still was populated in the closed cases. So this case basically was an open homicide hiding in plain sight in the closed case files. And I was scratching my head at that point. I couldn't figure out why they at that point decided to make an arrest just by association with the victim and the fact that he showed flight. He left town. That has to raise to the level what's called probable cause. Probable cause is basically that set of facts or circumstances that leads a reasonable person to believe a crime has been committed, and that the person that you're thinking about that did it may have done it. It's not absolute certainty, it's speculation, but it's based on evidence. And what they use as probable cause for that arrest affidavit is beyond me. But at this point, it's not about me criticizing detectives of what they did. It's triage. How do I fix this? At this point, thinking of why the detectives made that decision in 2003, I really don't know. I don't know what the motivation was. It could have been just to get him back from South Carolina. I knew this original detective. When I got to Homicide in the year 2000, he was there. He was assigned to Homicide. By 2003, he had started to transition out of Homicide, close to retirement. So I can't speak to what the motivation was or where he was in his career, and it could have been close to where he was actually retiring right after the arrest, and that may explain why nothing else happened after the case was dismissed. The case got lost in the system. Well, what I know is he was a good detective. He was proficient, but he had been in Homicide almost 20 years. Maybe he was burnt out. I don't know. But at this point, I'm stuck with this case. This case is now mine. I've got to figure out what to do and try to resolve this thing. So now Lee Hines has been linked to 2 cold case homicides. If he indeed is responsible for these murders, it's my duty to get him off of the streets. I called Detective Wilkowski back up in New York City, and I tell him I found the case and I'm gonna work this case along with his case. I'm gonna try and help us solve both of these murders and put Lee Hines where he belongs. And I'm gonna tell you what happens next with all the crazy twists and turns in the next episode. Coming up on The Murder Mind.
He told me that he told on several different occasions that he would kill her.
I can't believe what I'm hearing. This is one of those light bulb moments in homicide investigation. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please hit the like button and subscribe. And please check me out on other social media platforms, Instagram, X, TikTok, and Facebook. Lastly, don't forget to come back for the next episode. You won't want to miss it.